The invitation had arrived by messenger at 11:23 a.m. on a Wednesday in April 1969, typed on heavy cream-colored stationery with no letterhead, no return address, just 7 words: dinner tonight. Chasen's, 8 p.m. F.S. And David Marsh, who was 24 years old and had been writing music criticism for Rolling Stone magazine for exactly 8 months, stared at those 7 words for a full 2 minutes trying to decide if this was real or some kind of elaborate prank. Because 3 weeks ago he'd published a review of Frank Sinatra's new album that had used phrases like nostalgic mediocrity and a relic of an era that's already passed. And Sinatra's voice, once commanding, now sounds tired, like he's singing to an audience that stopped listening years ago. And the review had gotten attention, had been quoted in other publications, had made David's editor call him into his office to say, "This is exactly the kind of bold criticism we need. Don't hold back." But it had also made David wonder if he'd crossed some invisible line, if there were consequences for writing honestly about someone as powerful as Frank Sinatra. And now here was an invitation to dinner, and David couldn't tell if it was a peace offering or a threat. He called his editor. "I got invited to dinner by Frank Sinatra." There was a pause. "Are you serious?" "Yeah, tonight, Chasen's." "Did he say why?" "No, just dinner, 8 p.m. Another pause. "You're going, right?" "I don't know. What if he wants to confront me about the review?" "Then you defend it. You wrote what you believe. If Sinatra has a problem with that, he can say it to your face instead of through lawyers or publicists. This could be a great story. Or it could be the last story I ever write if he destroys my credibility." "David, you're a critic. Your job is to have opinions people disagree with. If Frank Sinatra is mad enough to invite you to dinner, that means you said something that matters. Go, see what he wants. And for God's sake, take notes." David went. He arrived at Chasen's at 7:53 p.m. wearing the only suit he owned, a navy blue number that had been expensive when he bought it 2 years ago but now showed its age in the shiny elbows and the slightly frayed collar. And when he gave his name to the maitre d', the man's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or sympathy, like he knew what was about to happen and felt sorry for David but not sorry enough to warn him. "Mr. Sinatra is waiting for you," the maitre d' said, and he led David through the dining room, past tables full of people David half recognized from movies and television, past couples leaning close over candlelight, past waiters moving with the kind of practiced efficiency that only comes from years of serving people who expect perfection. And David felt his throat tighten because everyone in this room belonged here, and he very clearly did not. And when they reached the corner booth where Frank Sinatra sat alone, nursing a bourbon and reading a folded newspaper, David's first thought was that Sinatra looked smaller in person, less imposing than he did on album covers or in films. But then Sinatra looked up and met David's eyes, and David realized that physical size had nothing to do with presence. "Mr. Marsh," Sinatra said, and his voice was exactly what David expected: smooth, controlled, with just enough edge underneath to suggest that the smoothness was a choice, not a default. "Thank you for coming." "Mr. Sinatra," David said, and he extended his hand. And Sinatra shook it with a grip that was firm but not aggressive, the handshake of someone who had nothing to prove. "Sit," Sinatra said, gesturing to the seat across from him, and David sat, and the maitre d' disappeared, and they were alone in a booth in the corner of Chasen's with the low murmur of conversation around them and the weight of 3 weeks of anticipation between them. "You want a drink?" Sinatra asked. Yes, whatever you're having." Sinatra gestured to a passing waiter. "Bourbon for my guest." "Neat." Waiter nodded and disappeared. Sinatra folded his newspaper, the Los Angeles Times David noticed open to the arts section, and set it aside. "You're probably wondering why I asked you here," Sinatra said. "The thought crossed my mind. You wrote a review of my album 3 weeks ago. I read it." David felt his pulse quicken. "Yes, sir. You called it nostalgic mediocrity." "I did. You said I sound tired, like I'm singing to an audience that stopped listening years ago." "I did." Sinatra leaned back in the booth, studied David with those blue eyes that had looked at 1,000 cameras, 1,000 crowds, 1,000 people who wanted something from him. "Why? Why what? Why did you write that? What did you hope to accomplish?" David took a breath. "I wrote what I heard. The album didn't move me. It felt like you were going through the motions, playing it safe, giving people what they expected instead of challenging them. And you think challenging people is the job of music. I think it's the job of art. Sinatra smiled slightly, not a happy smile, just acknowledgement. How old are you, David? 24. And how long have you been writing music criticism? 8 months. 8 months, Sinatra repeated. So you've been listening to music professionally for less than a year, and you think you understand what makes good art. I've been listening to music my whole life. Listening and understanding are different things. The bourbon arrived. David took a sip. It burned going down, but he kept his face neutral. Mr. Sinatra, if you invited me here to tell me I'm wrong, you're wasting your time. I stand by what I wrote. Good, Sinatra said. I didn't invite you here to change your mind. Then why did you invite me? Because I wanted to meet the kid who had the balls to say what everyone else is thinking but won't print. David blinked. I'm sorry. You think you're the first person to notice I'm getting old, that my voice isn't what it used to be, that maybe I've made a few albums lately that aren't my best work. You're not, but you're the first one young enough and stupid enough to say it in print. I'm not stupid. No, but you're reckless, which at your age is the same thing. Sinatra took a drink of his bourbon. Let me tell you something about criticism, David. Anyone can tear something down. It's easy. It takes no skill. You listen to an album, you find the flaws, you write about them. Boom, you're a critic. But you know what's hard? Creating something, putting yourself out there, taking the risk that what you make might not be perfect, but you make it anyway because the alternative is making nothing. I understand that. No, you don't. Because if you understood it, you wouldn't have written that review. Or at least you wouldn't have written it the way you did. How should I have written it? With respect. Not for me. I don't need your respect. For the work. For the fact that I've been making music for 30 years, and even on my worst day, I'm putting more thought and care into a single note than most people put into their entire careers. David felt anger rising. So I'm supposed to give you a pass because you're Frank Sinatra, because you've been successful. No, you're supposed to give me the same consideration you'd give anyone. You're supposed to listen to the album and ask yourself, what was he trying to do? Did he succeed? If not, why not? But you didn't do that. You heard that it wasn't for you, wasn't angry enough, wasn't rebellious enough, wasn't whatever you think music should be in 1969, and you dismissed it. You didn't engage with it, you rejected it. Because it deserved to be rejected. Sinatra's eyes narrowed slightly. Why? Because it's safe. Because you're capable of more. Because you've made albums that changed music and this one just exists. You know what I'm capable of because you've listened to my catalog for 8 months and decided you understand my career better than I do. I know what I heard. What you heard is an album made by a 53-year-old man who's been making music since before you were born. An album made for people who grew up with my voice. An album that wasn't trying to be revolutionary or groundbreaking, just honest, just real. And you dismissed it because it didn't fit your idea of what I should be doing. David set down his glass. Mr. Sinatra, with all respect, I'm a critic. My job is to tell people whether something is worth their time, and I didn't think your album was. And that's your right. But here's what you didn't do. You didn't consider that maybe, just maybe, you're not the audience. That maybe I'm not making music for 24-year-old critics who think Bob Dylan invented honesty and the Beatles invented melody. Maybe I'm making music for people who remember what it was like when songs had bridges and singers could actually sing. Maybe I'm making music for myself, and maybe that's okay. The waiter appeared with menus. Sinatra waved them away. We'll have the veal, both of us. The waiter left. David stared at Sinatra. You ordered for me. Yeah, the veal's good here, you'll like it. What if I don't eat meat? Do you? No, I do, but then stop complaining. They sat in silence for a moment. Then David said, why did you really invite me here? Sinatra looked at him for a long time. Because 30 years ago I was you. I was the kid who thought I knew everything, who thought success meant proving everyone else wrong, who thought the only way to matter was to tear down the people who came before me. And I was wrong. You know when I learned that? When? When I lost everything. When my career tanked in the early 50s and nobody wanted to hire me, and I realized that all the people I'd been dismissive of, all the musicians I'd thought were beneath me, were the only ones who'd take my calls. And I learned that respect isn't about agreeing with people. It's about recognizing that they're trying, that they're putting themselves out there, that they matter even when they fail. And you think I don't respect you. I think you don't respect the work. You don't respect what it takes to get in a studio at 53 and sing songs that you know people will compare to what you did at 30. You don't respect the vulnerability of that, the courage. David felt his face flush. I wrote what I believe. I know, and I'm telling you that what you believe is incomplete. You're judging the album based on what you wanted it to be, not what it is. And that's lazy criticism. It's honest criticism. Honesty without context is just cruelty. The food arrived. Veal parmigiana, pasta, wine that David didn't order but Sinatra did. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Then Sinatra said, "You're going to have a good career, David. You write well, you've got conviction, but you need to learn something." What? That being right isn't the same as being fair. You were right that my album wasn't groundbreaking, but you weren't fair in how you said it. You made it sound like I'd stopped caring, like I was phoning it in. And that's not true. I care about every album I make. I care about every note, even when it's not perfect, especially when it's not perfect. David set down his fork. So what do you want from me? An apology? No, I want you to think. Next time you write a review, I want you to ask yourself, am I engaging with this or am I dismissing it? Am I being critical or am I being cruel? Because there's a difference. And if you don't learn it now, you'll spend your whole career wondering why the musicians you admire won't talk to you. They finished dinner. Sinatra paid. Walked David to the door. "Thank you for coming," Sinatra said. "Thank you for dinner. One more thing, David. Yeah, keep writing, keep being honest. Just remember that the people you're writing about are human, they're trying, and sometimes trying is enough." Sinatra walked back into the restaurant. David stood outside for a long time thinking. 2 weeks later, Rolling Stone ran a follow-up piece. Not a retraction, just a second listen. David wrote about listening to the album again, about hearing things he'd missed the first time, about understanding that not every album needs to be revolutionary. Sometimes it just needs to be true. The piece ended. Frank Sinatra's latest album isn't going to change music, but it's an honest document of where he is now. And maybe that's more valuable than another attempt at greatness. His editor called. What happened? I had dinner with Sinatra, and I learned something. 30 years later, David Marsh was one of the most respected music critics in America. Someone asked him about his biggest regret. "I wrote a cruel review of a Frank Sinatra album when I was 24, he said. "Did you apologize?" "I tried to, but by the time I was ready, it was too late. He died." What would you have said? That he was right, that honesty without context is cruelty, and that I spent 30 years trying to make up for one review I wrote when I thought being smart meant being harsh. Did you succeed? David smiled sadly. I hope so, but I'll never know. The question is this. When a young critic writes that your new album is mediocre, and you're a relic and your voice sounds tired, and you could ignore it, or sue, or destroy his career with a phone call, but instead you invite him to dinner, buy him veal, and teach him that criticism without context is just cruelty. Is that generosity? Or is that making sure he spends the rest of his life knowing that Frank Sinatra was bigger than his worst review? Because maybe the most devastating response to being dismissed isn't anger. It's patience. It's sitting across from someone who tried to diminish you and showing them that you're secure enough to help them become better at the thing they used to hurt you with. And when that critic spends 30 years regretting one review, when he becomes successful and respected and still thinks about that dinner at Chasen's, is that because you taught him something valuable, or because you made him realize that the person he was trying to tear down was the only one willing to build him up? And maybe that's the difference between power and revenge. Revenge destroys, but power teaches, and the lesson lasts longer than any insult ever could.